Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Legalman joins me. I asked Legalman to come back on the podcast to talk about the prosecution of the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the way that they acted, how their actions, their shady strategy in violating his constitutional rights were the norm. And this is how prosecutors always act. And so we had a nice long conversation, and I figured it was very topical for the moment, and we give a lot of people a lot of insight as to what the system actually is and does to people. But first, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And check out his book, Project Manicore. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. And if you're not already checking out all the writings at the Libertarian Institute, go to the libertarianinstitute.org and check out all the articles that we have out. We have a lot of great podcasters. We have a lot of great writers that work with us regularly. So go to the libertarianinstitute.org and check out what's going on over there. Enjoy the show. There we go. Okay, I am here with Legalman. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you coming on. I enjoy talking to you. You're full of knowledge. And I got this idea to talk to you about this particular subject with the Rittenhouse prosecutor after listening to your interview with Mark Claire and how you were pointing out like the defects of the criminal courts.
Yes. There are many. There's so many problems with the structural sort of substantive procedural, meaning the very fundamental procedural mechanisms that are set up. They can never work. Like they will never produce anything except for what everybody can look around and see, which is horrendous tyranny. And the fundamental problem with the courts is that one side, which is the state, risks nothing, and the citizen risks everything. And no system of any sort, whether it be kind of a mediation system, whether it be an arbitration system, whether it be a court system, that can never work. And no reasonable person would ever agree to a system like that where they might end up on the citizen side. Of course, you'd always agree to it on the government side because you have a guaranteed winner for yourself in the long run because you're not risking anything. And I try to explain that to people. I don't understand why that is not more sort of publicly recognized by people, why it comes as kind of a shock to them or a surprise that they've never thought about it outside of the fact that, as we both know, the media is so totally controlled and is there simply to make sure that people never catch on to the real game.
Right. Yeah. And this was kind of one of the things that I was looking at over the last couple of weeks was Tim Pool's reaction to the prosecution in the Rittenhouse trial. And he seemed shocked. And it's like, no, man, these guys get paid. They get bonuses and raises based upon whether they prosecute.
Right.
It has nothing to do with
wanting the kid to go free. The state makes money if the kid gets locked up. If they ruin this kid's life, the state makes money. That's the way it works. And so I don't understand. And then he's going on and on about how the judge who works for the state should go after the prosecutor who works for the state. It's like, it's not going to happen. This is normal practice. You know, the prosecutor going, like, altering evidence. Now, I mean, it's not, they didn't do something that I thought they don't normally do. Like, instead of sending the high definition video, they lowered the definition of the video so it was a little bit less clear. And you know, it's like, okay, yeah, but this is a high profile case. Who's to say this doesn't happen all the time?
Well, and that was and there's a lot of points in there that you made. And I would say that, let me try to get them in kind of reverse order. That, yeah, with regards to that crazy video compression issue where they claim the defense didn't have the electronic ability to receive the document in Dropbox or some other format where it wouldn't have to be compressed, and they supposedly compressed it and emailed it to them. You know, I didn't see if they've even had a hearing on that issue. I saw that it was happened, and then they showed the video to the jury while the case was already closed. It was already, the jury was deliberating when this issue came up, which doesn't make any sense at all. That means they're getting it with no real perspective. There's no understanding of why this is being sent to them. It's so outside the trial. I thought it was a very strange ruling. I think they should have had a much bigger evidentiary hearing with regards to what really went down, with regards to why we're in this situation. Why is the defense just now finding out that this is what's coming into evidence and this is what they got? Because the defense has a right to see all this evidence way before that. I mean, there should never have been an issue about it. They should have been in prosecutor's office looking at it on their own computer, on the prosecutor's computer, if that was an issue, months and months and months and months ago, maybe longer than that. But it was very suspicious, odd to me that you have this strange explanation, kind of a dog ate my homework version of an adult. Oh, I didn't get your email. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have been out. That I didn't get a notification you called, that kind of shit. It's like not credible. And when you get to this kind of level, somebody, as you know, they used to say, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. What actually went on here? And because ultimately now it doesn't matter because the kid got not guilty, which I think was obviously the correct outcome. But and all these issues are way more important if the kid is now convicted on something and looking at trying to appeal, and how much of an abuse was this, or was it not that much of an abuse? You know, those things become way more important. But what people need to understand is that the Rittenhouse trial is not the only trial that's occurred in the United States in the last 2 weeks. I know people, that may be a surprise to some people, but apparently there are other cases going on in other courts all over the United States right now where defendants who don't have the resources that Kyle was able to muster, and they're getting jacked over by jerk-offs like those prosecutors in that case every single day. And the vast majority of people that get jerked over by these prosecutors, it doesn't go down in trial. See, trial is the very last place they're finally jacking you over. They've jacked you over every single stage prior to that. Every single stage prior to that. And the vast majority of cases plea out. And so you have to start stacking up and understanding that every single aspect of the criminal procedural kind of thing it's 100% controlled by the state. So the state makes laws, then the state enforces laws however it cares to with its own goons. Then the state has all of its own labs and technicians that come in and testify. It has police who do the arresting and all the threatening, that has a prosecution that's on their payroll. Then you go into a court that's also on the payroll of the government, that is obligated to interpret the rules that the government has also made, normally through the Supreme Court of the state, which are these procedural rules that are used. Then you have these jury charges, which are also something that's approved by the state, concocted by the state, to fit in within all of these different so-called laws that the state has also made up. And then the judge, of course, himself, in each individual case, it controls a fantastic amount of the trial, what evidence can come in, how long you have to open, to close, to put on witnesses, how much court time is going to be allotted. And then he rules on evidentiary matters each time. And then if you're not happy with it and it comes in, then the best you can do is hope that you end up like Kyle and get a not guilty. And if you get a bad case, then you have to go appeal to yet another set of government. And so every single stage of that government listing that I just gave right there, there's literally zero personal consequence to any government employee in that chain. Right. None, not one speck of personal consequence or liability to those people for doing whatever they care to do. The best you can hope for is that you get reversed and you get back to the same judge, which again, a lot of people don't understand that that's normally the way it happens. Like if you go to a trial and you have a judge who sucks, who's obviously biased against you and is ruling horribly and you're against you over and over, and you lose and you take it up to appeal and the appellate court rules in your favor. Do they reverse and render? Almost never. What they do is they reverse and remand, meaning you have to go back and retry the case or the issue, or if it was just a hearing, to the same exact judge that just screwed you over. Mm-hmm. It's completely idiotic. I mean, what the hell do people think is going to happen when you take an issue up on appeal on a judge and he gets embarrassed and it gets reversed and remanded? He's going to be looking for every opportunity where he can screw you within the so-called law with a slam dunk. And there's plenty of them out there. And so when you step back and get out of this crazy mindset that's brainwashed into people about with movies and television and endless so-called news stations and stories and interviews about the justice system, if you step back and look at it, you can see how horrible it is and how it has no chance of working at all. It's not a matter of replacing the attorney general, and it's fundamentally, totally and completely screwed, because the same people who hate communism because there's no personal responsibility, government gets to do blah, 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 and love capitalism because you've got to have, the person has to make the choice and risk their own money, and then they get their own reward and all this other shit. They are blind to the fact that the criminal justice system has no part of personal consequence except on the citizen side. There's literally no part of what they claim to be an essential part of any system that can ever work, that gets real feedback, because the feedback's meaningless if there's no consequence. You hear it all the time. Government officials, I take full responsibility. Well, so who cares if you take fucking responsibility if there's no consequence? Yeah. I'll take responsibility for it too. If there's no consequence, it doesn't make any difference. The only thing that matters is consequence, not so-called responsibility. I have heard the I take full responsibility, the buck stops here, all the stupid slogans from these government people endlessly about it on every single issue, but it doesn't ever change because there's no consequence.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, you don't have to look very far back in history or very hard to see this. You had the entire Clapper lying to Congress situation. I mean, we have this whole Anthony Fauci situation going on right now, where he keeps saying, "No, we weren't funding gain of function research." It's like, yeah, okay, sure you weren't. There are
Rand
documents
Paul.
that say otherwise.
Rand Paul catches him all the time in these so-called lies, and then writes a sternly worded letter to the DOJ or some crap. Oh, he needs to be prosecuted. Blah, blah, blah. No, and what happens? Nothing happens. You just move on to the next story, the next narrative. We had all the crap with Clinton and Clapper and Brennan, and they gotta go to prison, and the stupid Q crap was wasting everybody's time, draining them off, imagining there's all these white hat people working behind the scenes to help you out. Those are all fantasies. See, those are all fantasies. And it's the proof. You're never going to get proof of it, because the proof is the way the system actually functions, that you can't find examples that contradict it. That's the proof. And I ask, this is something that happens all the time, where I try to explain these issues that are going on, where it's so fundamental, the fraud is so deep. Okay. And people, it's impossible. Everybody knows bullshit. They always pull out because they've never looked into it. But I ask these people all the time, I say, okay, well, tell me, what evidence would you accept as proof? What evidence? If I could just go get any evidence at all, what would it take for you to believe that this thing is a scam all the way to the bottom? What would it take? And they never have an answer, because there is no evidence you could ever have. What are you going to do if Bill Clinton comes out and starts laughing? So I got a terminal illness and I'm going to be dead in 3 weeks. And guess what? We did it all. Blah, 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 blah. Just comes out, admits everything. People, he lost his mind. Oh, poor Bill Clinton. That's all it would be. There is nothing that you could ever have. Say I produced a document that said, you could fake, any document could be fake. They say it'll be an endless string of excuses that you can never get to the people, because the fundamental issue is, what evidence would be required? What evidence would be required to prove this, if the results that we can all observe aren't the evidence? Then you're never going to get the evidence. It's that simple.
Right. No, and it's you can go back and you can look at, all these CIA programs, especially the things they were doing in the 60s and the 50s and 60s.
Right.
And nobody was ever held accountable. You can look at every war. Everybody knows that every war that the United States has ever been involved in was a lie, and war crimes were taking place, and there were torture, black sites in all these kind. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody's held accountable. It's
Nothing
like,
happens.
What more evidence do you need?
Nothing ever happens. The very fact that the government purports to have authority to make documents secret from the public tells you that they're hiding something. There's nothing else. What evidence do you need? If you're married to somebody and you're starting to lose money and they're spending on all sorts of stuff, and you suspect they're cheating and everything, if they institute some kind of formalized secret system that you don't get access to, that you can no longer see their bank accounts, you can't see our joint bank account, you can't access their phone, text, computer, nothing. You're not allowed to know where they go. Is that going to instill confidence in you? No, you're going to know, well, you're obviously hiding something. And so the rules that people apply in their everyday life, they just suspend as soon as you say the magic words government. It's as though government itself is not just a group of individuals standing around doing shit. Government itself can't do anything. Nothing. Only an individual inside government can do anything. It's all ultimately just individuals acting. That's all it is. They're just individuals saying stuff, doing stuff. Well, the very fact that they have this elaborate scheme dreamed up where they can just keep all these documents secret as long as they care to. Well, how the hell are we ever going to have any confidence that what they're telling us is true? It doesn't. There's so many things like that are just so obvious to anybody who wants to just look at it and be objective, that I tell them all. I give this other example. People will believe all the time. They'll believe that North Korea, horrible, crazy tyrant, and all this other stupid shit they believe all about. Okay, it's like, okay, you'll believe that about them. Okay, well, do you think the people of the country believe that? No, they don't believe that. They believe that about the United States. And yet you can look and see that the people there are they're brainwashed. They're believing a fairy tale, but they can't hold the mirror up to themselves and see that they're believing a fairy tale, that they live in a fantasy land. It's such a fundamental, difficult psychological issue to overcome, because people do it in a million different ways. They do it in a million different ways, that sort of cognitive dissonance that prevents somebody from being able to accept the reality around them. It's hardly limited to the fact that government sucks and it's a criminal operation. I've done it myself many times in my own personal life, where I've come to realizations that, wow, I was just totally and completely I was just oblivious to what I was doing, what they were doing. I had a whole other story in my head about what was actually going on, and motivations, and it was all my own personal, basically, fantasy that my mind had created as a defense mechanism because of issues that I've got from when I was a little kid, something I did that I don't even remember. And yet it's like, whoa, it just expands out in a million ways. And the government is just very similar. The idea of it, people are so identified with their government about being freedom and liberty, whatever the hell that means to them, the goodness, they assume it is, with a few bad apples. And so it's not surprising to me that the people do it. It's just that in a case like this, where you're getting the evidence every day, all day, over and over, beaten into you, and the effect and the damage that the government does to people is so fantastic. It's just hard for me to understand why more people aren't at least open and curious about what's going on. But it's just it's a real testament to the power of brainwashing. It really is.
With the fact that this trial even occurred, when you could go online and watch the video the day after it all happened, which I did. I'd watched the video several times, and there's no way you could have sat down and watched that video and thought, oh yeah, this kid went out there to murder people. It was just, no, like, it was obviously self-defense.
100%.
And so the fact that it went to trial said a lot about our culture at the moment. It's just okay. Like, I have friends that were convinced that Kyle went out there and was hunting black people, and he shot 3 black men. I mean, that's what they thought happened. And I'm like, and then they're like, well, we watched the trial and all this evidence, and we're like, wait a second, there was only 1 black man involved, and he didn't even get shot. He just jump kicked Kyle in the head. And about that guy, they happen to know that the prosecutor knew who that guy was the whole time, even though through the entire trial, he was referred to as jump kick man. And the only reason he didn't get on the stand and testify as a witness is because he's being charged with arson for that night.
Yeah. Well,
and I mean, it's like, again, okay.
It's a great example. And for me, the Rittenhouse trial is, I'm going to put aside the fact that so many people, he's a female to male trans. He's a fucking, okay, maybe he is, and I don't know. I mean, is everybody in public the opposite fucking gender than they were born? Best I can tell, it's like every single public thing. Oh, female to male to female. Okay, every single one. Okay, I don't know. I don't get into those, because as soon as you start going down that road, regardless of how legitimate it is, and if they could do that, would they do it? Yeah, probably would, just to punk the public and laugh at us. But it doesn't matter, because it's not one bridge too far. It's 100 bridges too far. It's not going to be effective to persuade people to tell them like that, because they immediately shut you out and consider you're a kook. You have to deal with the narrative that we're given.
Right.
That's the only way you can ever be effective in public, trying to persuade people. You have to deal with the narrative we're given. You have to show why the narrative itself is not true from their own facts. It doesn't hold together, or show that even using the narrative, that the narrative itself doesn't make sense, that it doesn't make sense. And this Rittenhouse trial, one of the most important pieces of information we have about the Rittenhouse trial is that it was a huge news story for weeks and weeks, and it was publicly televised. countless other trials going on, and they aren't televised. And so nobody pays any attention to them. And so the very fact that it's in the news, that the very fact that it's in the news that's a huge piece of information about the trial. Huge. And it's very easily overlooked that they want people talking about that case.
They want to divide. They're using it to divide people. I mean,
certainly division is always essential. I think the big takeaway on the Rittenhouse trial is that, for me, was that that thing was about showing people that regardless of how obvious the self-defense is, even if you have a videotape showing it, because I remember watching it again within a few days of the stupid ass event, and they're like, well, this is just self-defense. It's not, I don't care what his purpose for going out there was. It doesn't really matter what his purpose was for going out there. Anybody who's faced with someone pointing guns and getting kicked in the head, well, then your life is in danger, quite obviously. And so you can defend yourself. But for me, I think the obvious point of it was to show people that even if you have a videotape, clear case of self-defense, the state's going to come after you. Mm-hmm. State's going to come after you. And yeah, maybe you can get lucky and get a not guilty. Maybe not. If it's a maybe not, then your life is over. It's totally over. And if you get lucky and you get a not guilty, well, maybe you can become a multimillionaire suing these media outlets. Maybe not. If you don't get televised, which most trials don't, all it's going to happen, if that thing's not on television, okay, that's not on television. Right. He's basically, his family is bankrupt at this point from trying to afford the defense. Now he's been found not guilty, but he's got on his record that he was charged with these things, and maybe you can get the charges expunged, but the arrest is normally not something you can get expunged. So he could be discovered later, and he'd have to be explaining that to employers, and in his local area, it probably made news in a newspaper and stuff like that. His life would be all fucked up. I'm like seriously screwed up, and as opposed to now, where he's probably going to become a serious multimillionaire with the slander suits and the libel suits, defamation. Right. But my point being that the message is sent, right? The message is sent. If you do something and it's even remotely close, you're going to probably be charged and lose, because even people who have videotape showing that what they did is clearly within the law of self-defense are going to be charged by the state, and they're going to come after you. That's the real message. They can't have people feeling they have the right to defend themselves. The police were told to stand down. Therefore, the citizens are supposed to stand down. Well, hold on, that doesn't make any damn sense. I thought the police were there to protect us. Oh, okay. So all of it is exposed there, and it's a very subtle message to people, very subtle message. Right. And it sinks in, though. I mean, that's anybody who's watching it, they know. Yeah. They know that, my God, what's going on? Look at this videotape. What about the direct testimony from the guy that said he pointed the gun at him first, and then that's where
then he goes on TV that night and says, well, that's not exactly what happened.
Yeah,
that's not what I was saying.
Yeah,
we all heard you, dude.
Right. And that's which is a great example of what I say all the time, which is these people need to be sworn in all the time. They need to always be sworn in, because as soon as you swear someone in, their story changes. It always changes every time. And then they're locked into that story. So if you brought him back, that joker who tried to go on TV and make it all up, and you could cross-examine him about his statements he made after his testimony there on television. Well, you could just get him to admit that he was just lying when he went on television.
I'm just telling the media what they wanted to hear.
I was just trying to clean it up. I was afraid that I looked bad, and I didn't whatever. I was trying to get my followers up on Instagram or whatever the hell his purpose of it was. I thought maybe I could get a book deal or interview, and it's just you could get them at that point because you have what they said before. and you could use it against them.
Right.
But because in our society, nothing is ever like that except in a trial. And there's so few times that there's a trial. Everything is just a spin job. Everything is just a spin job. And there's no consequence to somebody for just taking 50 different sides to an issue in whatever media platform they happen to be speaking on. There's none. There's no personal consequence to any of these people, be them government or NGOs or, you know, Leanna Wen, some fucking spite Pfizer spokesman or whoever she even purports to be, that weird kind of CGI mommy lady they wheel out all the time to scare people. She's a weird human being. But that's the problem, is that you've got these situations like this Rittenhouse trial where the facts that come out at trial are so different than the narrative that ran in the media for God knows how long.
Right.
And
I mean, even the president came out and called him a white supremacist.
right. And what will the consequence be? Well, the consequence may be that he gets some money down the road with some settlements. They certainly won't go to trial. There'll be some kind of settlements. And then, of course, there'll be sorry, we can't talk about the confidential, as you know, we're not allowed to, not will to discuss this. Then they can imply that there was some nefarious something that required that they settle the case, as opposed to reality, which is they got caught. And it won't be their own money. It won't be their own money. These government people won't be their own money. If it's media companies, it's just public money. They're all publicly traded companies. There's no consequence. Like the chairman of the board doesn't have to pay it out of his pocket. The president of NBC and ABC, they don't have to pay it out of their pocket. Then nothing happens to any of these people individually. Nothing at all.
Right.
The worst case scenario is some kind of press story that pops up for a day, half a day. Oh, big giant settlement, blah, blah, blah. And then that's it. Then it just disappears.
Well, you can look at like the Nicholas Sandman situation, and he got paid out by the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, and the same people that were paying attention to New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC are still paying attention to him. It didn't change anything. It didn't change anybody's mind. Maybe a few people, but nothing. It didn't move the needle, you know. And then you have like one of the things I was curious about. You could probably clear this up for me because I didn't understand this part of the trial. Was when, excuse me, when the prosecutor started talking about Rittenhouse pleading the fifth when he was first arrested and waiting until he got an attorney and lawyering up. Basically, he was going after him, basically saying, well, you're admitting you're guilty and you just constructed your story by hearing the testimony of those ahead. Why did the judge make the jury leave when he was like telling the prosecutor, you can't do this? Because that's information the jury needs. You know, that hey, this prosecutor's not being up and up, and you know he used your favorite term, and he said you're going against this defendant's constitutional rights. So
right, exactly.
I immediately thought of you too when he said that. I was like,
you're violating my rights. Oh yeah, you're dreaming, buddy. Well, the reason they make the jury step out, and people don't know this, but in a lot of trials, the jury spends a lot of time getting up and leaving, coming back in and leaving, coming back in and leaving. Okay. They're not allowed to see the kind of arguments that go on with regards to whether or not evidence should or should not be admissible. They're not allowed to hear that. That's why sometimes you'll see counselors approach a bench, right? And you'll see they go up there and they kind of talk quietly to the judge so the jury can't hear it. Right. And that's the same kind of thing. It's the equivalent of having them step out, in that you don't know how the judge is going to rule. And as a result, you could, if the jury was allowed to hear stuff like that, well, you could say all sorts of shit in your argument, right? Shit that's not true at all. And that could easily sort of taint the jury's impression. They might believe you, see, because nothing the lawyer says is evidence. Lawyers don't provide evidence in a trial. And so when the lawyers are sitting there arguing about what's going on, if one of the jury members likes you or one of the members doesn't like you, even though you're speaking the truth and you're arguing with the guy in front of the judge, it's just the likelihood they're going to be able to sort that out is zero. And they're just never going to be, the jury has a very difficult time forgetting things. You get these things, these pieces of evidence. Oh, okay, objection sustained. Jury will disregard that remark. How the fuck do you disregard?
Well, and that was kind of my thought. Like they already heard him question his pleading the fifth in
the damage is done.
Exactly. That was my thing.
The
So
damage
why
is
not
done.
why not let them sit in there and listen to the judge chew his ass, for 5 minutes.
Like I said, because what they would say is, two wrongs don't make a right. You can't compound the problem. Maybe some people didn't care. Maybe they will follow the instruction. Maybe they won't. But, a huge amount of trials, certainly strategy, is figuring out ways to get information in front of the jury in an implied fashion that you're not really supposed to. Leave them with impressions that are favorable to you. And that includes, being very careful of the way you react to information that comes in. Certainly you tell your client all the time, look, today we're going to have X, Y, and Z is going to be on the stand. They're doing X. They did, we already know what they're going to say. I don't want you to react negatively when they say it. Don't shake your head. Don't try to whisper in my ear. We want the jury to ignore what goes on. We want it to seem like the rest of this boring ass shit that's just dragging on for days. Just another thing that's said, just some horse shit that goes by. If you stand up and object or you do something, well, that calls the jury's attention to it.
Right.
A lot of times they're somewhat half sleeping. I mean, I've seen jurors actually sleeping in the box. And so, you don't know how much attention someone's paying. It's not significantly different than even if you're having a direct conversation with somebody, say, there's 2 or 3 people at the table and you're having a conversation maybe to one of them and the other 2 may or may not even be listening. Actually, it looks like they're listening, thinking about something else. You ask them a question like, oh, dude, actually, I didn't even hear what you said, honestly. It's like, oh, okay. So they're not even listening.
I do that to my wife all the time.
Okay. So the jurors are no different. They're sitting there for hours and hours and hours. They'd have no real clue about what's important, what's not. All they've ever done is seen stupid shit on TV and movies. They're pretty intimidated just being in there. It seems like this august legal proceeding they're involved with, even though there's really just a bunch of jokers in there, but they're impressed by the whole thing. And so there's countless reasons why the jury's not allowed to hear this stuff. And another major reason in state court, unlike federal court, is that state court judges are supposed to remain impartial. They're not normally permitted to comment on the evidence. And that doesn't mean just turning to the jury and saying, I don't believe this guy, you guys. That's not commenting. Commenting on the evidence is something as simple as your witness is testifying and the judge just kind of looks at him, kind of rolls his eyes and looks away. That's a serious comment on the evidence, serious. And most of the time in a state court, a judge that did that, if you got it on the record and it was clear he did it, you probably got a pretty good case for a mistrial. The judge can't comment on the evidence.
Right.
Of course, in federal court, he can comment on the evidence. This is a huge difference. The federal judges can take over cross-examination, direct examination. They can ask the witness questions.
I didn't know that.
It's so damaging. And if the case judges against you, you're just screwed, because if he cares to, he just takes over the trial for all practical purposes. And you just kind of stuck, and you're not going to win on appeal. These so-called abuse of discretion, which again, another whole gigantic can of worms, is this level of so-called standards that are used to evaluate these things, like the one you gave us with regards to a violation of his Fifth Amendment rights. You can't comment on the fact that someone took the Fifth Amendment. You can't comment about that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You're not allowed to, because it leaves the implication that he's taking the Fifth Amendment somehow implies some form of guilt. And that's what you're trying to imply by doing that. Well, that's not permissible. You're not allowed to do that. And so you look at that and you say, okay, what's the standard that the judge is supposed to use in order to determine whether or not that was something that rises to a level of a mistrial? What is it, right? There's nothing in the Constitution that tells us. Is it clear and overwhelming? Is it preponderance? Is it, well, what is the standard? How do you decide? And see, these things are all just invented. by government. These standards are just invented by government. And then just say the standard was that it has to be, clear and convincing evidence that it prejudiced the jury. Okay, well, let's just say that is the standard for that type of thing, whether or not he should have declared a mistrial or not. And I don't blame the judge for not doing it, because a lot of these things are, again, strategic, and it's difficult to explain to people because he can just wait and find. And if the jury's, found guilty, the judge could ultimately then take it away from the jury at that point. Just override the jury's and just say, no, I'm going to not guilty. There's nobody there. He could have not let the jury see the case. He could have, dropped a bunch of the charge. We don't know what he was going to do. Anyway, like I said, all these things, they don't matter now because he was found not guilty.
Right.
But in a case like that, where you say, clear and convincing that was damaging and he should have declared a mistrial because the jury was prejudiced by it. Okay, that's the standard. Well, how do we know he used it? How do we know? What does it mean inside this judge's mind to say it was clear and convincing that the jury was prejudiced by it? People will disagree about that. Mm-hmm. So again, you're right back to this human factor of, well, what does it mean to even present a standard that the judge would then apply? How do we know that he would apply it? You can appeal that, and you get a 3-judge panel. And the 3 judges, one agrees that he misapplied it, and two think he didn't misapply it.
Right.
Okay, so it's upheld. Or you change one judge's mind, and now 2 think he misapplied it, and one thinks he applied it properly. Well, there's completely and totally different outcomes for you as a criminal defendant. You're going to prison for the rest of your life, and the other one, you're free. And look at this little teeny tiny, nothing, nebulous, impossible to get your hands around thing that tips the scales on something like that. And that multiplied times thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands is what the criminal so-called justice system is. Mm-hmm. And anybody who starts looking at that can see why a case like the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, it's not an outrageous one-off thing. There's countless prosecutors who are just as so-called incompetent or corrupt as the ones we just saw proceeding there in the Rittenhouse trial. And quite frankly, anyone who thinks this is the first time these jokers have behaved like this in cases and prior to the trial being heard, they're dreaming. This is how they conduct their professional lives. This is who they are. This is their best behavior. They know they're on national television. You think you're getting better behavior from them when they're not on TV? You're getting worse. And so when you just start looking at all these factors, this is why the system is so insanely out of control. And with that simple example of the Fifth Amendment violation, if the judge himself faces personal consequences, let's just say it would have to be clear and convincing evidence. Okay, if it was clear and convincing that the jury was probably prejudiced. Okay, I'm just making up a standard. I don't know what the standard is, but that sounds like a pretty reasonable standard, right? Clear evidence that the jury would have been prejudiced by it. Okay, okay, there. If that's the standard, and he rules that wasn't the case. The way the system should be set up is that if it goes to an appellate sort of review, I think you need more than 3 judges on the appellate review. But if you do, and it turns out that those judges find that he misapplied that standard in a way that harmed the defendant, okay, not that he gave the benefit of the doubt to the defendant, but that he ruled that it had not prejudiced the jury in against the defendant, he should have to face personal consequences for that ruling. So he should have to have large personal bonds or be looking at some kind of sanction, some kind of, you get 2 strikes like this and then you're off the bench and you can never be a judge again. I mean, they kick people, they kick referees out of the fucking World Cup for suspicious shit. And then they can never officiate another game. But we have these judges up there that are behaving in these insane fashions for years and years and years and years. They're on the benches ruling after ruling. And such a small percentage even get appealed. And so there's no personal consequence and you need to have them. If you're an employer, You write your employee up when they do something they're not supposed to do. That's what HRs and look, I got to give you a warning. So, you get another warning and it's such and such, and then we got to let you go. It's like, okay, well, but the judges don't face that. The prosecutors don't face that. It should always be like that. If the prosecutor attempts to get something into evidence that he knows is improper, like that prosecutor did, okay, well, he should have been seriously warned, sanctioned. And if he does that again in another trial of any sort like that, or again at this trial, well, that's it. He's done. He's going to lose his license. He's cooked. You have to have that kind of personal threat and consequence to the people who are in there. When you're talking about trying to take citizens' rights away, to walk around free, throw them into cages, take their life away from them, there has to be something on the other side. And there's nothing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I noticed, and you kind of touched on this earlier, and so I want to kind of go back a little bit, was the demeanor of both the prosecutor and the defense attorneys.
Yeah.
Because there was at one point in the trial where the guy who got his bicep blown off was testifying that he did point the gun and advance on Rittenhouse. And as soon as he said that, the prosecuting attorney buried his head in his hands. Like, right. We're fucking dead. Like we're toast. That's our whole fucking case.
Right.
And then the closing arguments, I was very unimpressed with the defense attorney and his closing arguments. And it's because I don't know if this is like a personal tick of his, or I don't know where this came from, but he kept looking at the jury and going, "Come on, people, use your common sense." And it's like, why are you insulting the jury? Like that's not how you lay out an argument, dude.
Right. Well, all these, and I'll say that I did not see any of the defense's closing argument. I watched a little bit of the prosecution's, and he was massively misstating the law and often the evidence, and again, was allowed to continue on doing that by the judge, which was ridiculous. But the reason the defense lawyer does something like that is, when you try a case, normally the concept is that you kind of have a theme. You have this, it's kind of a pageant you put on and for him, I guess it was, come on, people, use your common sense kind of thing. That was, did you ever see the movie Wag the Dog?
Oh, no, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I never saw it.
So that should be mandatory viewing for everybody. Everyone should have to watch it every year, in my opinion. It shows people what's actually going on. But they had a horrible campaign slogan: "You don't change horses in midstream." Okay, it wasn't really part of what actually won the campaign, but they gave them credit for it. It's this horrible, stupid, schlocky load of shit. Just like, come on, people, use your common sense, to you came off very negatively. Some other people might have really liked it. Maybe they focus grouped it beforehand, depending on how elaborate and expensive the trial is. That's the kind of thing you do. And you bring in these sample potential juries and these focus groups, and you bounce ideas off them. And, like, how did they receive that? Oh, I thought, come on, people, use your common sense, was highly insulting, and as though I wasn't being able to use my common sense. Maybe they got a bunch of jurors that said it was really persuasive. Wow, I was like, yeah, I need to just use my common sense. We don't know what's going on in their minds of why they strategize like that. People try stuff in trials, and sometimes this stuff falls flat. Sometimes it doesn't. Just like a stand-up comic, so they think the joke's hilarious. They lay it out there. It's fucking dead air. There's nobody laughs. So we don't know.
Yeah.
But as far as the prosecuting putting his head in his hands like that, one, it's extremely amateurish if it wasn't intentional, because this whole thing is some kind of Masonic, put on, which is what a lot of people think. And like I said, I'm suspicious because of the fact that they're running it publicly. Yeah. But the bigger problem I have with the guy doing that is it's only a couple possibilities, right? He knew this testimony was coming and had hoped that the guy wasn't going to actually say it on the stand.
Or he wasn't going to get asked the question the way it was asked or whatever.
Yeah, he was hoping that he knows from his own interviews of this witness, which they've had, he knows that that's the case, that Kyle didn't point his gun at him until he pointed his gun at Kyle.
Right.
And so he either knows that, or during his interviews, The guy took the exact opposite case and told them something completely different.
Told him the same shit he told the news that night.
Yes, right. Told him that, Kyle pointed at him and whatever. Okay. Well, prior to the time you go into these kinds of trials, you get sworn statements from these witnesses. Okay. Well, that's a pretty material part of his testimony. And so there would be some kind of sworn statement by him saying that, Kyle pointed the gun at him first. Right. And then he's on the stand, sworn in, testifying about something else. Well, at that point, you don't put your head in your hands. You wait for a reasonable point so you don't completely blow the jury up. And the next time the jury's out, or soon thereafter, you approach the bench and ask for the jury to step out, and you tell the judge, Your Honor, we've got a sworn statement here from this witness saying the exact opposite. And, we're unaware of this. If this is the case, then, it's going to affect the way we prosecute this case, and that we may be dropping the charges, at least part of the charges that are affected by this testimony. And this man's committed perjury in one of these two situations, and we intend on prosecuting. But we need to get to the bottom of that right now, and we need to ask him some additional questions outside the hearing of the jury and get straight. It doesn't matter you put your head in your hands. See, that all goes back to this idea that the prosecutor's there trying to win. Mm-hmm. See, that's not the job of the prosecutor. The job of the prosecutor is to try to do justice. And if in this case, the guy, his real testimony, when he realizes he's under oath as opposed to a sworn statement, which he may think doesn't really mean jack shit, if he gets up there and testifies that he pointed the gun at Kyle first, okay, then that's the case. There's nothing to be upset about. The prosecutor should be happy. Good. I'm glad it came out now, and the man didn't keep lying and convict an innocent person, someone who had every right to not be on trial in this case. That's the way a prosecutor who actually is trying to do justice would be thinking. He's not upset. He doesn't give a shit if he loses. His goal is to try to get to the truth of what actually went on out there. And so, again, when you see him put his head in his hands like that, it's just such strong, clear evidence that what just went on is that the prosecutor is not interested in justice. He's interested in creating a case and having a show and getting a win. He's interested. He's interested. Doesn't care about.
He's interested in advancing his own career, and he doesn't give a fuck what happens to this kid's life.
Right. And well,
that's what I saw. That's exactly how I saw it. Whenever that happened, I was like, this motherfucker don't give a shit about this kid. All he cares is where his career goes after this case.
I mean, since the vast majority of trials are not televised, I mean, I've seen a lot of misbehavior and things like that, and people's motivations are elaborate. They aren't necessarily it's not a career maker or breaker normally in any kind of trial. Now this one, because it's televised, hurts, but I think that it's more ego than it is so much a concern for career, because that's based upon an extended period of time. This guy may be thinking he can become a professor like Darden and these other losers from the OJ trial who sucked so bad they rolled into these great positions. But when I look at that kind of situation, it's obviously whatever his motivation is, whatever it is, okay, it's not the right one, because the right one is that justice be served. Okay. And if you're only interested in justice being served, that's not your reaction. Mm-hmm. You might be angry. Okay. You might be pissed off at that witness, that how dare you lie on this statement and have me rely on it and charge somebody with a crime he can spend the rest of his fucking life in prison for. And you either withheld this information or gave me wrong information about the critical material fact about whether or not you pointed your gun at him first. I mean, I'd be pissed as hell at that guy if that was the case. And you're damn right I'd prosecute that guy for perjury. He needs to go sit in prison. He needs to. Not this guy he wrongfully accused and I improperly relied on because I expected him to be telling the truth. Sure, a reaction like that, makes sense. Yeah. But like I said, unless the only other possibility is that he knew the guy was going to say it. He told him that earlier. He'd say, well, and tried to work around. Yeah, that's the question. Maybe your memory's not so good, and I don't want you testifying about something you're not sure and clear on. You got to be 100% clear. Don't want you assuming and guessing. A lot of stuff was happening that night. A lot of stuff. There's a lot of action. Can you be sure? Can you be sure? The video doesn't show. He might have tried to do all those kinds of things, which again shows horrible bad faith on his behalf.
Right.
So every possible scenario that explains that shows that the man is not trustworthy. He is violating his oath to try to get justice done. And he's a horrendous public servant who needs to be fired for sure, disbarred. I personally think the man should go to prison for violating his oath. See, if there's no sanction for violating your oath to do justice, and you can have a case like that where you can literally attempt to put evidence on that's is going to be false.
Right.
Or at least highly questionable evidence. Okay. You're not supposed to do that, especially from the state side. The defense, I got no problem with the defense using any and everything they've got at their sort of disposal, to the extent that they're not actually directly lying. I got no problem with the defense doing it. I got huge problems with the prosecution even getting close to those lines, getting close. They need to play it 100%. Every kind of benefit needs to go to the defendant. You don't just try to jam stuff in there and sneak it. That's just not proper. It's not proper. And so that Fifth Amendment thing, like I said, that's my feeling about what that indicated when he stuck his head in his hands. Every explanation for that emotional reaction proves that the man is no good. He's not a good actor. There's no way to have that response. It's just not possible.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And that's what that was my gut instinct when I saw that happen. I was like, this guy thinks they have to prove self-defense. He doesn't think that he has to prove murder. Like, he's like backwards here. I don't understand. Like, his motivations are all wrong.
Right. It shows very clearly his motivations, what he's thinking, what's going on in his mind. It's not appropriate. He's upset that his case is falling apart.
Yeah.
There's no reason if his goal is to so-called protect the public again from criminals who pose a danger. Well, if it comes out that, well, hold it, this guy actually doesn't pose a danger. He didn't do anything except for when someone pointed a gun at his head, tried to shoot him, he shot back. Well, that doesn't pose a risk to the public. That's what he's supposed to be, protecting the public and giving them the right to do, which is to protect themselves. So there's no way to interpret his reaction as anything except for a clear indication that what he's doing is not what he's supposed to be doing.
And I don't know, do you shoot any?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was in the military, and when I first saw that video, one of the first things I thought was, this fucking kid has amazing trigger discipline.
Right. I mean, like, this chaos
like,
going on all around him. He only shoots the 3 people who are problematic, and he kills 2 of them. It's unbelievable. I mean, his self-control. I think I twittered about how the fact the kid's 10 times better than 90% of the cops out there.
Yes.
Kind of condition. He didn't run through the Israeli hate the fucking, see the public as your enemy kind of training the cops.
Oh, that's a whole.
So they're
that's a whole nother subject.
Overwhelming force. We have to bring overwhelming force. Control the situation. All this bullshit. He was just literally trying to defend himself, as opposed to just wasting everybody in his field of view. I was quite impressed by him. I mean, anybody who watched really any part of it, Kyle Rittenhouse does not pose a risk to anybody who doesn't pose a risk to him. He's just, I would have no problem, guy. I'd come over to my house, live next to him. I would not be the least bit concerned about that dude being a problem. And anybody who watched any of the trial can see that's just the case. They had that picture of him leaned over right next to the judge watching it. Nobody's scared of Kyle Rittenhouse.
Exactly.
Dangerous.
How many times have you ever seen that happen? Like, you've been in law for what, 20 years or something like that?
30 years.
Like, how many times do you see the defendant just walk up and sit next to the judge to watch a video?
Yeah, it was very, very strange proceeding. That was a really odd arrangement. Somebody who's on trial, basically a double murder trial. I mean, it's not it's not nothing. It's not like, oh, he broke into a car where the cop, judge may or may not even care if there's a video. He's not really a violent guy, but you're up there trying to claim this person's a violent risk that can just runs around killing people. That's, if anyone who took those charges seriously, that would not be going on. And so again, it's just another clear indication that nobody in that court, not the prosecutor, not the judge, nobody in that court was the least bit concerned and believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was actually a threat to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's just clear they don't think he's actually a threat. I thought the entire concept was consequence, punishment for this wrongdoing, and put him in these cages in order to so-called protect the public from this. It's like, well, there's nothing to protect him for now. Obviously, nobody's the least bit worried about the kid. He's not a danger. He doesn't pose a danger. It's just obvious as hell. And so again, what you're seeing on the screen of the trial is a total disconnect from the weird proceedings that are going on, and then the strange about the so-called proceedings that then is relayed to the public. It's just, everything about it was such a crazy upside down spectacle. That's really what it was. It was a spectacle.
Exactly. Unless he's that Ed Norton character where he's like faking multiple
American History X.
No. I was sorry, the one where he faked multiple personalities.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like unless he's like that, But so okay, how are you doing on time? Because I have like 3 more things I want to cover, but if you don't have the time, we
it's close. It's close. We got a few more minutes, but I don't have a lot more time.
Okay, well, okay, let me lay it out like this. One of the things I noticed that really bothered me that nobody really wanted to talk about was that if Rosenbaum, who brutally raped children, had never been released, none of this ever happens. Nobody wants to talk about that failure of the criminal justice system.
How dare you? He's the one that was shot. How dare you?
I don't care. He should have been put to death by the state. Like, honestly, if they're like you said, if they're really out there to like protect, like the guy should have never been put back on the street. He brutally raped children, 5 children between the ages of 9 to 11. And it's like, okay, why was this guy back on the street that night? That's the first thing that like really bothered me. Nobody wants to talk about that. Had that guy not gotten out of prison, like he should have never gotten out of prison, none of this ever happens.
Right. Well, it reminds me of an old Saturday Night Live skit from like the 80s, probably maybe the 70s or 80s. And it was part of the news, and there'd been a plane crash and people had died. And of course, this was back when they were a lot edgier and actually funny. And they said, ultimately, the blame has to lie with the passengers themselves. If they didn't get on the plane, they wouldn't have been killed. That's the same kind of thing. It's like, well, look, I mean, this causation issue can go back. There's people that can blame the parents of the kids. Oh, like the parents never should have allowed their kids to be around him, and then they wouldn't have been raped. It's like, we can keep going back in causation. And that's why it's always so difficult, because, all sorts of things led up to that moment. And that's why they don't become issues in the case, because in a trial, just like where ultimately you can only impeach somebody so much on cross-examination, and you can only go into so many things, because at some point the trial has to end. At some point, the witness's testimony has to end. And like I've just kind of jokingly and lightheartedly kind of said, I'm sure a lot of people will be offended by, how dare he make fun of that kind. I'm just saying that when you start looking at the never-ending series of potential causes, so-called, of the event, they go back. And that's why the law recognizes all sorts of things, proximate cause, and all these different kinds of causes that have these elaborate definitions that, again, nobody's ever going to be able to sort out. And that's one of them, is that why was the guy there?
Yeah, I just feel like it's such it's so telling about the criminal justice system that a man that goes out, he seeks out single mothers in order to brutally rape their children, is out on the streets when how many people are in prison for life for possession of marijuana? You know, it's like this
3 strikes and all this stupid
this
crap.
this entire system is so backwards. It's so
broken.
jacked up.
Yeah, it's totally broken. That would be kind of my original points too, that, you know, how can you just look at the system, the way it actually functions, and say that the thing could ever be what they claim? It's so far off from what they claim. That's the proof. See, that is the proof right there, that in a real system, that can never happen. See, that could never happen. And if it did happen, okay, you never would have heard about it, because what would have happened is they would have found out about it during the investigation of the so-called charges, and that dude would have been wheeled off to prison, and he would not have been charged with either killing him, or I don't know if that's the guy that was a blown off arm or some other thing, but he would have just said, well, look, guys, I mean,
no, that was the first guy. He killed him. That was the guy
you'd be sitting around. I mean, if you're a real guy who's interested in justice, right? You watch the tape, you see his self-defense, and then you see who he killed. You're like, he did us all a favor. What is this crap? Well, we gonna charge this guy? Make any damn sense? I mean, what the hell are we here to do? Are we here to protect the public or not? Obviously, this guy slipped through the cracks, or somebody. In fact, I don't even know what he was convicted of. I saw that there was a bunch of weird convictions. I didn't look into them for the reason they've just gone into, which is they don't come in. They're not relevant to the trial of whether or not the event occurred, but they are extremely damning to the system itself of why was there a trial going on. Once you're going to go down the road of having a trial, then they're not going to come in. But, you know, and it's also just because somebody's done a bad act in the past doesn't mean you have a right to kill them without reason. But again, every case is supposed to stand on its own facts. And so the totality of the so-called prosecutorial discretion in a case like that, if you're a prosecutor and it's like, well, dude, you see the video? I mean, he's obviously defending himself, and look who he killed. I mean, it's like, really, we're going to go to this trouble? Why are we going to this trouble? Like I said, you wouldn't do it if you have any kind of prosecutorial discretion that was being used reasonably.
Well, I have a conspiracy theory I want to run by you.
Okay. Yeah.
And this goes back to a couple of things that we've touched on during this. So I want to get this in there.
Okay. Let's get it in.
I think that the defense knew, that the prosecutor knew that they were going to lose the trial. And I think that's why they did all they mishandled evidence. They violated the Fifth Amendment. I think they knew that they lost. I don't think they thought they ever had a shot. And then you hear Kamala Harris come out directly after the verdict, and she said, well, this just shows, she goes, I've been fighting for equity in our legal justice system since my entire career, and this shows that there's a lot more work to do. Then Jerry Nadler comes out and says that the feds need to look at this case and bring up charges against Kyle Rittenhouse. I've been saying for weeks, long before these two people said these things, that what's going to happen is the feds are going to bring charges up against Rittenhouse. Now, I know Mike Cernovich said, well, once he's found not guilty and this trial's over, the feds don't have the ability. Yeah, well, this gives them an excuse to say, hey, look, the old way of doing things doesn't work for our modern times, and we need a new way of doing things. Therefore, we have to expand the Justice Department to handle local situations and not depend on the state to handle this. And I think the feds will use this as an excuse to expand the Justice Department and go after and go use federal crimes, use the federal government to go after local issues.
Well, clearly, I think it's possible that a lot of people were theorizing when I was watching a little bit. I thought, wow, these guys really suck. And, you know, I find it difficult to believe that if you really wanted to lose, there's easier ways to lose than that aren't so embarrassing to your career as the show they put on. You know, you could just make some clearer error as opposed to just being bumbling fools and just like what they looked like. I don't put it this way. If I wanted to try to lose a trial in a subtle way, those aren't the guys I'd hire because it sucked. And so they're not capable of doing it in a subtle way. Whether the fixer's in, that's been It's been debated. I don't know. Again, it's possible. Nothing would surprise me, but I don't really buy it. I don't really buy that it is the fact that it was televised. I think they win either way. If you get a conviction, you can spend that in a certain way. If you get a not guilty, you see how they get to spend that. As far as the federalizing of police and prosecutions, that's clearly a goal. They have a long-term goal. This could be another piece in the puzzle of building that so-called public case, so that the idiots who run around and believe in voting and everything else will start being swayed, and the single moms will be all concerned. Oh, I don't want to work. And it's all the stupid shit they pull. All the emotional voting, you can stir the black people up. And if black people think they're going to get a better deal from the federal government than they were at state and local levels, man, they are dreaming. I mean, it's certainly a distinct possibility. I find it the sort of height of irony that somebody with the career professional history like Kamala Harris has as the attorney general, where she was literally putting truants in prison and imprisoning their parents. And basically just running a bunch of poor people of color into
keeping people on death row.
Bullshit. Yeah. She's the opposite of anybody who's ever fought for any kind of justice and liberty for the small guy. She's the exact opposite of that. But because she's a theoretical black female, I don't even know how. Why is it if someone's half black, so-called, that they're black? Tiger Woods, he wasn't the first Thai, golf champion. She's not the first, whatever, Indian Islander. She's black. She's always the same crap, which is if you're half black, then that's it. Obama, he's half black. Oh, okay, well, she's the first black president. I don't understand why they do that, but you can get away with that on that side, on that kind of liberal side. They can just push endless amounts of horseshit out the door, and their people are very susceptible to believing that crap, just like the constitutional conservative mobs are super susceptible to anything you want to bring up about the glory of the founders, and just start spewing slogans about rights and constitution and God-given, and just starts stringing together these meaningless slogans that don't have any real effect by any of the people who are actually so-called representing you. The absurd statements those people make are just as ridiculous as the kind of statement that Kamala Harris or Nadler make with regards to wanting to help the people. The idea that you're keeping the government in check and you have all these rights and all this other shit. There's no evidence that these constitutional conservatives in politics ever do anything of the sort. And yet their own brainless mobs run around spewing stupid slogans like that, just like the fools who support Kamala Harris and Nadler run around supporting those people and spewing slogans that also make equally little sense and are totally disconnected from reality. They're just flip sides of that same fake coin. Right. That's all they are, you know, and where they're going with it, I don't know. Where the whether, like I said, a lot of people think he's a female to male Masonic fucking trans.
I've never heard this. So like, I'm going to have to look into it.
Oh my God. Anytime I post about it, oh, he's not a man. It's not a man. Her. I always the her. And there's like, I don't fucking know. I mean, I get that so much. Like literally everybody out in public life is some kind of a female to male or male to female trans. It's just very confusing to me. I mean, I understand there's a lot of it out there, but I just can't go down that hole every single time. But
well, Alex Jones as Bill Hicks has always been my favorite conspiracy theory.
Yeah, there you go.
This one might take the cake.
Right. Yeah, it's another one. They show you pictures and stuff. It's like, dude, I can show you pictures of people that look like me. Everybody's got those, whatever the doppelgangers.
Yeah, doppelganger. Yeah.
Yeah, they got them out there, and it is what it is. And
I saw a metal musician that looked like Tom Hanks the other day.
There you go. Exactly. It's just all sorts of people, and it is body doubles and other stuff. And so, I only steer away from conspiracy theories with regards to my show only because I don't think they're effective. I enjoy them. I often look into them, and I know a lot of the things that people call conspiracy theories. The vast majorities aren't conspiracy theories anyway. They're just the reality. A conspiracy theory is something like the idea that 2 planes brought down 3 buildings and 19 hijackers somehow pulled off September 11th. That's
Yeah.
that's the absurd conspiracy theory. If people knew the real story behind how complex it was to plan and all the different agencies and all the different stuff they had to do to bring to bear in order for it to happen, where these buildings would so-called collapse. They didn't even collapse; they just turned to dust. If you had all those things that went on, and then someone came up and said, no, 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 the government says that it was 19 hijackers, like that's absurd conspiracy theory. That's the one that would be so obvious as the conspiracy theory. But
everything burnt up except for passports.
oh yeah, the
How
miracle
convenient.
passport material, just how the people at the bottom of 100-story building collapsing on its own footprint, pancaking down, somehow survived in the fire escape wells and could see sunlight at the top after the collapse. How could you have sunlight peeking out from 100 pancake floors? Anybody can look at the pictures and see there's not 100 pancake floors at the bottom. There's just not a hole. Actually, there's a giant hole in the middle where the building should be. But again, that's the point. Is the reason I don't get into it is I like to use the narrative they have. It's already stupid and fake enough that there's always plenty of holes in it in order to poke fun at it and to show that the narrative as given is not consistent, doesn't make sense, and isn't true. That's the best way. If put it this way, if you can't convince somebody when you have clear evidence that the narrative as given, not having to come up with new facts and go do research. No one's going to do any research. What you're being told isn't consistent, doesn't make sense, and isn't true because of those reasons. If that isn't sufficient and persuasive, then there's no point going on to the conspiracy theory level with most people. Yeah. There's no point because you're already dealing with something that should be easier for somebody to accept. You're asking less of them. And if that's not enough, it's like saying you want to have a fight with some skinny fucking twerp on the block. And he says, nah, I'm afraid of that. Okay, when do you want to fight Mike Tyson? It's like, dude, I don't even want to fight the little skinny twerp. I'm not about to go fight Mike Tyson. And it's the same kind of disjointed reasonings. Like if you don't believe that 2 + 2 is 4, well, can you let me show you this quadratic equation? If you now I convince you, like, dude, you're not convincing me anymore. It doesn't make sense to me that you go from a simple proposition the person can't handle to a way more elaborate proposition that's not going to persuade them. You have to start at the very simplest steps.
Well,
the most basic.
That leads my third question. So like, if you could just lead into it and then you can plug and we'll be done. I don't want to keep it too much longer, but my third question that I had was, if you put your conservative hat on, does this red pill the conservative? So if you could probably pick up where you left off and kind of lead into that.
I've heard a lot of people, this is the same thing I hear about how that's the fundamental sort of concept behind Q that they always justify, even though nothing they said was true. Oh, woke up so many people. Oh, woke them all up to it. It's like, okay, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. I mean, it definitely woke some people up in a fashion. The problem I have with that, just like with the Rittenhouse trials, it wakes people up in the kind of a way that doesn't help. It drives them into the other side of the lie, which is that, well, look what's going on here. And what do they immediately think? This is the problem with liberals. Okay, that's what they'll go to, is that this is a one-off, that this is a prosecutor and he's a liberal. He was wearing like one of those, like a Black Lives Matter pen and some rainbow horse shit. And it's like, see, this is the problem. We need to get the right people in there. And that's the reason I have problems with the concept that it wakes people up. It wakes people up and then they get dragged into the ditches by the constitutional conservatives, unlike what I explained to people in the beginning of the show about the way the fundamental structure of the system is unworkable, and that the constitutional structure and this structure of the government being in charge of everything, that's the problem. It's not a matter of getting the right people, and you get the greatest people in the world into a system that sucks that bad. It's never going to work. It's always going to fail. And so when it so-called wakes people up, I find that people who wake up and then use these, they get dragged into these constitutional conservative so-called solutions and answers. They're some of the most difficult people to ever move off center, because they believe they've already now found the truth, that they used to be deceived. And now they figured it out. Now, see, now the constitutional conservatives, they got it right. We got to get rid of the liberals, as opposed to somebody who is still on the other side. And you have an opportunity to talk to them and show them why, when this comes out, that the fundamental structure of the system can't ever work. Now, it's not a matter of going to the constitutional conservative, that the structure of the system is wrong, and that the complaints and the problems that you're hearing about with the system, they're not really the problems. They are simply another layer of deception. Right. Just like the deception you were operating in earlier, where you believed that the justice system was fair and blah, blah, blah. Now you've seen this trial and you see what a horrendous shit show it is. I'm not hearing anybody discussing the fact that this is an everyday event. See, all the people who are on the conservative side, they're acting like this is somehow a one-off, that this prosecutor sucks, that this was an outrage. They're not talking about how this is going on every single day all over the country and has been for decades and decades. That's not the narrative running on the right. And so that's not the narrative that people are going to be swayed to. And that's the problem I have with it, is because fundamentally the entire system is run on this fake left-right narrative of the Overton window, where they keep people inside. They can switch people from liberal to conservative. You're never going to convince somebody who's a conservative, constitutional conservative, to go to the left. That's never going to happen. You can get people on the left to go to the right, but you never get people on the right to go back over to the left. That doesn't ever happen. And the key is you have to pull them all out of that narrative and show them that they're all operating inside a false narrative box. And that's the only real hope we have, is to get people out of it. And it's a fantastic uphill battle. I mean, it's just a fantastic uphill battle. So that's what I would say about that.
And if everybody listened to the Quash,
they would just listen to the Quash, which they actually would be able to put the pieces together. The reality is, it sounds like an absurd brag, but the reality is I've sorted out these issues for people, and I can give them endless examples, and I do every week. And that's how you put it together. And most of the things I tell people, they probably never heard in their life. And then some people, they kind of like, yeah, I always wonder what was wrong, and the answers never really made sense. And then when I heard your show, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense, that fits. And then it all starts to make sense. And there's a lot of peace that comes from being able to understand the way the pieces really go together, and not wasting time being dragged off in these ditches that happens to people. And
you do a great job with that too, because you cover some of the shows I used to listen to when I was a conservative, or considered myself a conservative, and I'm like, oh, I remember listening to that guy.
I used to listen to constitutional sort of right-wing radio all the time for a couple of decades, and then I figured it out. Well, 20 years ago I figured it out. But it's very difficult to figure out the problem when you're in it. And, once you come out of it, then it's so clear when you re-listen to those people. It's like, wow, how was I falling for that shit? Because I used to support it and believe it and all this other crap. And then, for the 2 decades I haven't, every time I listen to it, I just think, wow, it's so obvious once you can see the game. It's so obvious. And until you can see it, it's just hidden from you. And so, if people really want to understand the truth, most of the time it's depressing. And, those constitutional conservatives, they offer this sort of morphine, this lie to cover up the real problem. And the lie makes people feel good and like they're doing something, they're accomplishing something, they're organizing to vote, and they need to get their guys in there and all this stupid shit. It's never going to work, but it makes people feel good. It makes them feel good. And the Quash doesn't make people feel good a lot of times, until you kind of start seeing that what I'm saying is true. And then it makes people feel real good to know that there's somebody else out there who sees it and gets it. And that makes you feel like, okay, good, I'm not crazy. That is actually what's going on. And I used to think it was this other stuff, and now I'm no longer misled. So if people,
keep doing it, because like there are a lot of people, like I really enjoy your show. I don't get a chance to listen every week, but I try to catch up as much as I can.
Well, great.
Because I know what you're doing, and I know like you have a way of approaching these subjects where you can put that conservative hat on and remember what it was like.
Oh yeah. I mean, I 100% know I know every one of their arguments. If I wanted a huge podcast, I would just be one of these constitutional conservative jokers and just spew that garbage because it makes people feel good. There's a huge ready-made audience.
Mhm.
And the audience for my show is way smaller because it's just the message is so brutal. It's so
Yep.
difficult to accept. You have to let go of so many things. And
Kill
And
that
that's just the
cognitive
reality,
dissonance.
but we don't have, see, there is no real solution. Solutions aren't possible to problems until you deal with the actual problem.
Exactly.
And so until you actually deal with the problem, it doesn't work. If you've got a broken leg and you just want to ignore it and pretend like, well, I just strained a few muscles or something, dude, your leg's fucked. It's not going to get fixed by doing some rehab for some strained muscles and putting a hot and cold pack on there. It's broken.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to deal with that. If you don't, it's going to get worse. It may become infected. You may die from it. And that's what constitutional conservatives and media sell. They sell a load of shit to people that doesn't work, and anybody can look around and see it doesn't work. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I've asked people over and over again, name one single problem voting's ever solved. Name one single thing constitutional conservatives on radio have ever fixed.
Yep.
Name one single thing they've ever fixed. They don't ever fix anything. And that's the problem, is that it's a very brutal situation we're in right now. And it takes some, facing up to some hard truths to have any chance.
Sure
So-
enough.
So I
All
hope
right,
people
man.
do listen. And if they want to catch me, they want to find me, they can, you have always find me on Twitter until they kick me off from Legalman at US Law Review. And I do a pretty good job of avoiding their algos. I think I know how they kind of work. So they censor the shit out of my Twitter feed, but you can still go over and look at it if you want. If you don't, I don't care.
Well, I appreciate you being on, man. You're always gracious with your time and a lot of information. So I really do appreciate you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it too. I hope people enjoy the show, and hope your audience likes it.
Awesome. We'll be in touch. We'll do this again.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye.
You wanna be a hero, instead you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you, with the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Cause this world it needs a cleansing to burn away the shame and destroy all the remnants of those who are to blame. And we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood. Our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.